Well, first of all, I want to thank the crowd. I expected maybe 2, 3 people, and this is a little bit of bigger crowd than I expected, so thank you. I appreciate it. It flatters me. The title, IP Phones, Challenges of Multi-Vendor Support. Basically, what this boils down to, any of you that attended the free PBX presentation, is Endpoint Manager. So just a quick recap of what I'm going to go over, an introduction, why talk about this, an informal survey of brands used. I'm a little curious of what's going on out there in the wild. I'm a quick demonstration of Endpoint Manager. I've got a blue light on my internet. I'm not sure if it's really going to work, but I'll give it a go. We'll talk a little bit about vendor provisioning and then have a discussion of best practices. I want to hear from you guys what you're doing out in the field. I started using Asterisk back when Andrew Gillis brought out Asterisk at home. At the time, I was a chief technologist for a school district, and it seemed geeky, seemed like something fun to do, so I thought I'd give it a go, and have never turned back since. It's now what I do every day. Overall, I've got 25 years plus. I haven't really, I turned 50 this year. I haven't really been into counting how many years I've been doing this, but it's been a while. This is my second year at Astricon. Oddly enough, I put in submissions, they accept them, and here I am. So, for me, the question is why even talk about this? Primarily the method used to manage endpoints really has an impact on your ROI. If you have to deploy somebody to the field each time you're sending out handsets, well, that's a truck roll and that's expensive. If you can pre-deploy or pre-provision a phone, send it to a customer, they plug it in and it works, they're happy, you're happy, direct impact on ROI. It also impacts how they feel about you as a company, your service, and so forth. So it's to me, it's a really important thing. And as I mentioned, proper endpoint management really reduces customer frustration. One of the scenarios we run into a lot of times is we acquire a customer and they've got, for instance, some Telecom phones or some SNOM phones or something like that. And it's really kind of painful to have the customer, although we do this occasionally, we have the customer, okay, I want you to go into the GUI and change this, or go into the phone interface and I need you to change the TFTP server, this, that, and the other. Well, end users are not super comfortable doing that, but often cases that's the only choice you have. Well, was the only choice you have. And so it's just kind of a thing to really reduce customer frustration. And as I mentioned, proper pre-provisioning really reduces truck rolls. I mean, that's the name of the game. You really want to spend as little time on the customer premise as possible and reduce cost of the deployment. And the other reason to talk about this is, well, new tools are starting to mature and they're worth talking about at this point. And when I say that, by that I mean the Endpoint Manager. So here's what I just kind of want a few people to chime in, just give me a little clue as to, who out there with a show of hands uses more than one brand of IP phones in their deployments? Quite a few of you. So that, I mean, this is a common occurrence. We're all trying to struggle with this in the field. Okay, so just shout them out. Brands you guys use. So, right. Okay, so pretty much all the stuff we support, which is pretty exciting, right? Who out here, besides the actual, free PBX Endpoint Manager or the Smooth PB Exact Endpoint Manager, who out here is using any form of endpoint management? What do you use, sir? Oh, okay, very good, very good. Back there, I saw some hands. Switchvox. Anyone else? Something you developed in-house. All right. So on the Switchvox, does that do more than one brand or just Polycom?
It does Polycom and Digium phones.
Polycom and Digium phones. Okay, so a couple of brands. Yes, sir. I did not know that. Cool. That's very cool. Okay, so there's a few guys out there using a few things, different things. Okay, show of hands. Who out there is handwriting configuration files still? Yeah, a few people are. And it's painful, right? I mean, I early on I took a couple of SNOM gigs and 150 phones, hand wrote all the configuration files for them. You know, it worked perfectly, including the expansion modules and so forth. But you know, honestly, day-to-day management of that is just not tenable. I mean, it really isn't. So, all right. So now I'm going to kind of break into the Endpoint Manager, and I'm going to attempt in a moment a demo of it. But again, the internet's been a little bit spotty, so I took a few screenshots, and I want to kind of forewarn you that the screenshots I took snippets of it and then made it so we could see it on a slide. And so on this slide, you can kind of see the various manufacturers that are supported. And you'll notice that a few of them, for instance, Algo, CyberData, those aren't necessarily phones, but they're going to be things like, you know, SIP speakers and lights to indicate ringing and so forth, right? So it's more than just IP phones that are supported. So this is a shot, and again, just the caveat, I kind of took snippets of screenshots and melded them into something we could look at on one screen. If the demo works, we'll, you know, see a little bit more of it. But this is an example of, you know, what a template may look like, and this is an Astra template. So this is the top part of it, and it shows essentially, you know, some of the basic functions you can set on the template. And one thing I want to point out, when you do set up a template, you can set it for one phone, so you can have, you know, particular features for this particular model, and then you can set up another template to have different features on another model. One of the common things to do is to set up a template just for like a receptionist, so that you can manage the expansion module, which is really key. And there's a really cool feature when handling expansion modules I'm going to demonstrate, hopefully, in a moment. Well, we'll see how the internet goes. So this is a bit about the soft key management of it, and you know, forgive me if it's a little bit jumbled, but what I wanted to show is that for each soft key, you have several choices, you know, from BLF transfer, XML, speed dial, intercom, services, call list, and multi-cage paste. This is for Astra. For each manufacturer, what you have available is slightly different. This is an example of program keys for, you know, just like an expansion module. And I don't think this is going to play what I want it to. So what I want to point out is that I rearranged things here in an alphabetical fashion. The previous slide, you can see that they're out of sorts with regards to alphabetical. That's one of the things that occurs with expansion modules and managing them quite often, is that you've got, you know, 18 keys on the side that are all listed alphabetical, and somebody leaves the company. And then, oh gosh, then some poor sap has to go in and reprogram them and reslide it and reorder them. Well, that's a lot of work, you know, and the Endpoint Manager strives to make that much easier. And what I want to point out with this slide is, and I'll demonstrate it here in a moment, is that they're out of sorts, but once you submit it and the screen refreshes, they're all lined back up again, 1, 2, 3, 4, ad nauseum. Seemingly simple, but pretty cool feature. It makes it a lot easier to manage them. This is an example of the phones that are supported. What the next couple of shots are just basically screens of, you know, the top of a template. And for example, and the reason I put this one up, the Telecom one, is because I want to point out that now legacy phones are supported, which is kind of a big deal, because oftentimes when we're intaking new customers, they're going to say, oh, hey, we've got like 20 501s and, you know, 30 601s and whatnot. And we don't want to tell that customer, oh, well, you know what, that's too bad. Here's a price for a new phone. You know, I want you to spend several $1,000s to become a new customer with us. Not a real fun position to be in. So this makes it a little bit easier to say, oh, well, if you've got existing phones, we can support them, no problem, right? And just you know, the provisioning service, although we have TFTP and FTP enabled, you can also do HTTP provisioning as well. And with Polycoms, I find HTTP provisioning to be a little bit easier in terms of them actually getting the config files, especially the older, the 01 series. They just don't seem to do TFTP at all well, and then FTP better, but HTTP the best. This is an example at the top part of a Yanling template, and you can see this, you know, pretty much the entire range of the stuff that they support is in there. This is a shot of extension mapping, and so this is where the rubber hits the road. You know, you collected your MAC addresses, you've gone in and said, okay, I've preset my templates, and basically just map the extensions to the MAC and tell it which template to use, and you're off and running. Naturally, you have to tell the phones where to look for it. On this screen, what I've done is on a couple of the phones, I've hit the advanced module. And the thing that's kind of interesting here is the BLF substitution. What that basically means is, let's say you have a template that has BLFs for a particular office. Well, you don't want your own BLF key to be on there. So typically what we do is just substitute like the preceding or the next line in your own phone so that you don't have, your own line and then a BLF key for your own phone. That doesn't really work out. So this facilitates managing eliminating your own BLF out of a template, if that makes sense. The next one down, and this is one that I just absolutely love. It has to do with Panasonic phones, like their cordless phones. You get a base station, you got 6 handsets, and you don't want them all to use the same line. Well, you just basically go into the MAC address for however many lines that you want to have on that, and you choose. You say, okay, extension 405 is going to be account 1, extension 406, I didn't do that here, but extension 406 is going to be line 2, 407 is line 3, and so forth. It makes it easier to manage things like the Panasonic cordless phones. In fact, it makes it premium. I really like that feature. One thing that I also am really excited about is the ability to tie ATAs to your T38 pass-through. So on the upper left, what you're looking at is just basically on a SIP trunk. And again, I've taken snippets of screens and kind of pasted them together. It doesn't really look like this. And I've said, okay, on this SIP trunk, I'm going to have T38 pass-through. On the inbound route, I'm going to say, hey, detect faxes via DOTI and send them to this fax recipient, which happens to be a SPA 112. Right? And then in the SPA, I've said, okay, for this extension 112, I want you to use that for faxing, and I'm going to use it on port 1, basically. On a 2-port ATA, you choose 1 or 2, right? Theoretically, you can add extension 113 or what have you and have it for a separate fax line on the same ATA. Pretty nice functionality. I particularly like the ability to just tie it in T38 Gateway all the way through from the inbound route, provided your DID supports T38, of course, and tie it all in like that. So it's seemingly a simple feature, but pretty exciting when the rubber hits the road, because it does what it's advertised to do. This is just again a short snippet of what's known as the base file edit. And again, I'll try to demonstrate this depending on how well my internet works here. And this is really just a short snippet. This one is Telecom phones. And the page, it's several pages long, if you will. It basically exposes all the configuration parameters that are in a template and allows you to customize them. One of the really key features to this is, let's say you've customized a particular template and you're pretty happy with it, but then Endpoint Manager gets updated. Well, the concern is all my customization going to be overwritten? Well, the answer is no, it's not. All the customization that you put into a particular template is going to persist through Endpoint Manager updates. Seemingly a minor feature, but it's pretty important, especially if you have done any extensive customization. You really don't want it overwritten. So this is just a shot of what a configuration server settings look like. I've kind of obfuscated, but I've said, okay, this is, by the way, an Astra telephone. And again, not the whole screen, just the bit about configuring a particular phone to utilize the service. And in this case, I've chosen TFTP. And just for argument's sake, the reason I used alternate, my understanding is that you can't put a FQDN in the primary. You have to use IP in that space. I prefer not to ever use IP if I can help it. I like to use a domain name, because if the IP changes, then what, right? Here's a shot of a Yanling phone. I mean, pretty simple. Just TFTP server URL. That's all you really need to do. Here's a SNOM, same thing. And then the last slide, I think, is Panasonic. This is the only one, that's not the only one, but this is one that varies a little bit in that you can't just put TFTP or FTP or HTTP. You have to actually put a little interesting string on the end of it, config bracketed mac.cfg for Panasonic phones. I think some of the others do that, but that's the one that really stands out to me as a little bit different. Okay, so there's kind of another side to this, and that's vendor provisioning. And I'm going to kind of touch briefly on it, but there's a couple points I want to make about it first. you know, it can provide a more direct line of control. And by that, what I mean is alleviates to pay a distributor to do the provisioning for you. Can alleviate the need for it. I mean, many distributors, they charge, you know, anywhere from $1 to $5 to provision each phone as they ship it out for you. I think on average we pay $2.99 or something like that. Here's the problem with it, in my opinion, though. Somebody buys a phone, it's provisioned, it's on their system, and the employee is disgruntled and takes their phone with them as they leave the company, puts the phone on eBay, hasn't wiped the configuration. Person on eBay buys the phone. Yeah, frankly, even if it got wiped, if the data still exists in the vendor provisioning realm, they plug the phone into the network, it's going to reprovision itself onto whatever system is there. And if somebody hasn't done diligence to like removing the extension, well, there you go. You know, if it's got international capability, you're open to, you know, potentially tens of thousands of dollars of toll fraud. Makes me a little bit nervous. I really love the idea of vendor provisioning. I'm going to just show a few screenshots of, I just picked one, I picked Yanling. Anyways, point being is it's really neat, but there are some risks that you have to be very cognizant of, and it's really a matter of due diligence with the equipment. If the equipment leaves the facility, yeah, it could turn up somewhere where you don't want it to. So this is a shot of, you know, basically you add some devices, add some servers, and say, okay, when the phone comes up, it's supposed to go out and, you know, find its server and provision and so forth. Any Yanling folks in here? Well, I mean from Yanling. No? Okay. This didn't work very well for me, guys. You know, I'll be, you know, straight up. The T38 phone seemed to do it every time, but what it tries to do is, and I hate this. I really don't want to diss anybody, but I find that while all these provisioning things are really cool, in the field they just are not reliable enough to depend on. So with the God, somebody's probably going to storm in here from Yanling any moment, but basically on the T28, it would come up and ask for the provisioning service before it got an IP address. Well, it's not going to go anywhere without an IP address. So I'd sit there and hit it 2 or 3 times, and it's supposed to be zero touch, right? So, you know, you'd expect not to have to touch the phone. Well, I did. And then one of their newer phones, the T38, which is a really nice phone. I actually quite like Yanling phones. It wouldn't grab it at all. So all the gear they sent me to bring with me to demonstrate their provisioning, well, you don't see it here well, the reason is that I was afraid to demonstrate it. You know, and I'm sad to say that, but I'm just going to give you the straight poop and what I've experienced. I'll just cover a couple of things here. You know, basically pretty simple. You add a server, you give it a name, a URL, whether it's TFTP, FTP, or HTTP, or potentially even HTTPS. And then you just add your phones to Mac, assign them to that particular server, and, you know, on a golden day, you're in business. Now, mind you, I mean, what the secret sauce to this working is having taken the MAC addresses and put them into the Endpoint Manager, and so it's sitting there waiting for the phone to check in with it after it's hit this and said, oh, well, I need to go to this particular PBX and get my config file. If it only worked. So at this point, I kind of want to break it out into a discussion of you know, practices, open it up to questions. Yeah, got one back there. The licensing. Okay, at this point, I'm going to bring it over to Tony and let him answer that question. What I'm going to do is take a few, I'll field more questions, but I'm going to attempt a little bit of a demonstration here. So I'm going to fly through a few screens because we're going to run out of time fairly quickly. This is the global settings, and as you can see, you know, you can tell it what's the IP address, what's the external, you know, FQDN, what I want for the web server port, what I want for the SIP port, and most importantly, changing the default passwords for the particular endpoints. Pretty important thing because you know, leaving the default passwords is not particularly a good idea. Okay, so here we go. Let's see if this actually works. I mentioned, and I'm just going to use this as an example. I mentioned the part about expansion modules, and this particular section isn't on an expansion module, but I just want to demonstrate the functionality. You have an expansion module. It's got, I don't know, whatever, 10, 15 different names on it that are alphabetically listed because that's how the receptionist likes it, when most do. And somebody leaves the company, or you get a new hire. Well, how do you inject them in there? Well, pretty simply, actually. You just go ahead and take the next field that's available, put it in, and then drag and drop. And again, this is not directly representative of that, but you can drag and drop the different fields and let them go. And then when you notice that now key 7 is before key 5, but when I hit submit, it's going to reorder it. I'm not going to do it because I don't trust my internet connection, to be honest with you. But had I hit submit, it would reorder them in the proper, numeric list. Pretty nice feature. And just for argument's sake, this is a template for Astra phones. So, yeah. Oh. Yeah.
It's all drag and drop, so you just add a button, a spare one, and you can move it anywhere you want.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And one of the really cool things is that, several organizations I deal with, they have more than one receptionist, right? And receptionists want a particular order of their expansion modules. Well, it's easy to, accommodate their needs. And, and that's the name of the game, accommodating the customer needs. And this really makes it easy to do that, And it also, long-term management of the phones and their configuration files, it takes the headache out of it. I mean, no longer am I in BB Edit or whatever code writer I'm using and, having to manually do it. The other problem is that I no longer have to worry about the syntax of the config files. Whereas, okay, so for example, SNOM phones, I think in version 6 and 7, they use flat text files. In version 8, they are now using XML files, right? And I think that's the case with a lot of manufacturers. Telecom at some point switched from using flat text files to XML files and so forth. Well, the Smooth team and the Free PBX team, they take care of that for me. I no longer have to be so concerned about dragging out the manufacturer's manual of, okay, here's how the syntax is now with this firmware. It's taken care of for me. Makes my life a lot easier. I mean, it's really just mind-boggling the amount of different devices that are supported. So that's a template for an Astra phone.
Actually, I have a question on that previous one.
Oh, okay.
So you have like various selections for values, and I'm just noticing. So some of those values, I assume are probably native phone values, but are some of those tied into kind of the native capability features of Free PBX that kind of bringing the intelligence of both of them together?
Well, yeah, I mean.
TRV.
Oh, okay, transfer to voicemail. Oh, okay, so Astra phones are kind of a separate case almost in that there is a XML integration with that comes from Astra, and then Smooth and you guys have all kind of enhanced, right? And so this particular one is native to Astra phones. If I was to go to a different manufacturer, you'd see that we don't necessarily have that as a sample template because it's not supported. Does that answer your question or no?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay. Did everyone catch what we were talking about? Basically, his question was, okay, so I see these different things that we can do here, transfer to voicemail, this, that, and the other. Well, not all manufacturers are going to support all features. When you go to an individual template, it'll demonstrate, okay, here's the things that we can do with it. And again, they're all different. I mean, when you come to devices like cyber data, like overhead paging devices and such, the template's going to look entirely different because, well, it only supports so many things, right? Yeah, so I mean, they're all different. I'll see if I can pull one up here in a sec. I don't know if it's going to work. This is an example, and the formatting's a little funny. I wonder if I can make it a little bit smaller. Yeah. All right, so I'm just going to kind of scroll down this. You will not be tested at the end of this, so don't worry about, really paying attention to what I'm showing you here. But I just want to demonstrate that, as I scroll through, there are a lot of options in the configuration file. And here's where you can go in the base file editor and customize that particular template. So, go ahead.
I guess maybe hard-coded. So if you bring up that screen, Robert, if you go to the bottom of the screen. Oh, thank you. So if you go to all the way to the bottom is an easy one. Keep going. Okay, so let's say SIP XML notify event, about 5 up, Robert. The default value of that is 1. So if you go change that to 0, we'll see if your internet works.
Yeah, well, good luck.
And then just click down 1. Just click on another field just so they can see it. So we'll actually see on the way left-hand side now there's that check mark that just showed up. That's telling us we just made a custom change to this default value. So when Robert submits that, all of the custom changes are going to be at the bottom of the screen. So at a glance, you can see any custom change you made off the default values. And you can revert back to the default values at any time. So anything that's marked, anything that was marked as custom, we won't touch on an upgrade of that module. So if you've decided to override our defaults, or you can add your own defaults by hitting the Add Settings button, and you can add all your own defaults. Anything that's custom, we will never touch on an upgrade. So it gives you complete control over the hard-coded values of all the different templates and manufacturers of the phone configs.
The ability to save your own custom templates like that, so you might have
Yes.
version 1, version 2, version 3, and then the default?
You can, so can you save your own custom? You can create as many templates as you want, and you can save them, and you can export those templates and import them into another system with the Endpoint Manager on. So you can export and import any template. And you can name it whatever you want, and you can create a template on a system and hit the duplicate button, and it'll duplicate it, and then you can go make your 1 or 2 changes and save that one, so you don't have to reinvent the whole wheel.
So, if I may,
Yep.
there was an offline. I was talking with a gentleman who was asking me, okay, so the firmware is also managed within the system, and the question is, okay, so I provision a phone and everything's groovy, but then a new version of the firmware comes up, the phones all get it, and some particular function is no longer working correctly. So the question I was asked me, is there going to be any way to revert back to the last version? And so I brought it up to Luke and Andrew there about, hey, how's that going to shake out? Are we going to have the ability? And the answer is yes. At some point here, fairly shortly, you'll have a choice of 3 different, the latest, untested, the current stable, and the previous. So there'll be a choice of 3 firmware level versions, which is pretty handy because you never know. Out in the field, there may be some function that is fairly esoteric and doesn't matter in general, but you're going to have a customer out there that somehow or another needs that particular thing, and the latest firmware screws it up. Well, yeah, there'll be a way to back that down. So basically, yes, sir.
And on just a single phone if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. What you could do is set up a separate template and say, okay, this single phone is the only one that needs to revert. You'll set its firmware level version in that. It's mapped.
Yes, with most manufacturers.
Yeah, right.
Astras, for example, you can't because Astras pull from in an Astra, or do they allow you now to? Okay. There may be some manufacturers that don't let us define what firmware version you want to use. There are a few, I believe, out there still that don't let you define that. But the vast majority of the manufacturers will let you define what firmware version to use on a per device or template basis.
Right. So. Yeah. So I mean, absolutely. So you could say, okay, well, I'm gonna test this reversion back to an older one on a single phone. Say, hey, that's great. Go back into the, the endpoint, or rather the. Oh, shoot. Where's the screen? I don't have it, and I don't have the internet that's going to come up. But basically, in the extension mapping, you just go back in and change the template, save it, tell them to reboot the phone, and it'll grab whatever firmware you told it to. So, other questions? Yes, sir.
A little bit of a left turn, but is there any API support built into this for adding MAC addresses to the system?
Not currently.
No, not currently.
So,
Roadmap, or
Do you use an API or are you using more for import?
API? Currently, to give you an idea, currently what we're doing, we have some custom APIs built where my techs go pull a Polycom off the shelf with a symbol scanner, poke in a customer ID, scan it, hits the API, builds a config file, and dumps it on PDX.
Okay.
I would love to be able to have them scan it and shove it into the
Wouldn't be hard to add. there is the concept in extension mappings. You can export all your mappings and re-import them off of CSV. So exposing a simple API for that wouldn't be hard.
Just being able to customer number and MAC address would be.
Yeah, not a problem. It wouldn't be hard to add.
No, I'm not sure I'm going to get internet here, but all right, guys, we're running a little over time here. Are there any other questions? Oh, there's one. Not currently. It's a good suggestion, though. I mean, that's. Ah. So okay, so for Grandstream Legacy, apparently yes, but you know, that's not commonly used.
Plans, it's not one of the higher priorities at the moment, but it will most likely be coming up with it.
So, and you know, if you guys haven't included in already, this front row here is the developers. So, you know. All right. Well.
One of the differences here on this, just in closing, is the fact that everything we support here, we have in our labs. We won't add a device that we don't physically have, that we can test everything on. As anyone who's done a lot of multi-phone support before has learned, manufacturers say, oh, the big clouds are all the same, but there are subtle differences between different models that FlightShooter provides. So everything we test, everything we have in the lab and test. If a problem's reported on it, we pull the phone down, we can figure out what's going on, and resolve it. If it's the firmware's causing the problem, whatever it might be, it allows us to test everything and make sure everything's working with every model phone that's supported there.
If you haven't been by the VX booth on the exhibit floor, come on by. There's probably about 70% of the phones and devices from the labs on display there to give you an idea of how much is involved in making this a reality.
So I'll just say this one last thing. One of the to me, one of the killer features of this is you are no longer limited to a particular brand of phone. You know, we're just simply not limited. What we can do is address the customer needs with whatever device we need to put in that application. So it's very empowering. It really saves a lot of time and trouble, and again, really has a direct impact on the ROI. So thank you very much.
Let's hear it for Robert.